Hi, I'm J.W. Wilson, Executive Director of the Learning Code Institute. So that we can have a better vision of how to deal with our opiate and addiction problems, I have been asked to give you some background on the neurogenetic basis of how people become addicted. In other words, why is it that some of us become addicts and others don't? And why is it that those of us who become addicted to drugs and alcohol have such a hard time trying to stop? Let me give you a quick background on the learning code science first. A key finding of our 30 years of research at the Institute is that in each one of us, there is a genetically implanted learning code that is represented by approximately 7,000 genes, which influence all your brain's function. When a percentage of these 7,000 genes are stimulated in the correct way, they produce thousands of enzymes and over 100 neurotransmitters. All this amazing complexity, all this brain activation, in turn leads to the cellular and structural change in your brain that creates profound learning and behavior change. To grasp the true value of the learning code science, it is important to understand that if there is no cellular or structural change in your brain, then there can be no learning or behavior change in your life. Our research shows that the reason most of our existing learning, motivation, and addiction initiatives are failing to perform up to our expectations is because they fail to understand this neurobiological approach of how to create structural change in people's brains so they change. The result is humanity suffers. The discovery of the learning code science is so impactful and so disruptive that it has been compared to the discovery of the double helix shape of DNA made by Watson and Crick in the 1950s. We have presented this research to or worked with prestigious organizations like the Mayo Clinic, Turner Broadcasting, the Leadership Training Group for NASA, the UN, and the National Institutes of Health, as well as governments institutions in Estonia, Colombia, Brazil, Nigeria, and Peru. So how does this science help us understand addiction and what to do about it? Please know that for easier understanding, I'm going to greatly oversimplify this complex science. So if there are any neuroscientists watching this, please know I'm going for easy understanding over exactness. So let's start with the two main ways that you can become addicted to drugs or alcohol. First, you can be born genetically pre-set up to become an addict. If you inherit a variation of a particular dopamine gene called DRD2 gene, this variation can help ensure you have a tremendous opportunity to become addicted. Look at this video of a DNA strand. You see that bright spot? If you are born with that particular genetic makeup, your life in relation to drugs and alcohol is very different than those of us who don't have this genetic makeup. The minute that gene, really there are many other genes involved, but for simplicity's sake, we will say when that gene gets stimulated by drugs or alcohol, bang, the devastating cascade of addiction starts, and it is not easy to stop. When this genetic makeup is activated, cravings and desire for their drug of choice drives addicts into a world where they will do anything to keep drugs and alcohol in their bodies. From heredity studies, we know those of us with this genetic makeup can pass it down to our children. This is one reason children of addicts are 8 times more likely than the general population to become addicts themselves. Take my personal family history. My mother and father both died from drug and alcohol overdose. Their offspring, my sister, who is in recovery now, used to take enough codeine a day to kill a horse. And for 10 years, I ran over 10 businesses fueled by a fifth of whiskey or more every day. In my offspring, sadly, my youngest son, Leon, a real sweetheart, recently OD'd from a heroin overdose. He was only 25, and it broke my and my family's heart. So my family is a perfect example of what can happen to you when you have this gene. With this genetic makeup, life can be hell. Okay, so what happens if you don't have this genetic makeup? How do people become addicted to drugs and alcohol? Really, it's quite simple. Through the biological process of adaptation, your brain changes to deal with new environmental input. Let's say you hang out with a crowd that drinks a lot, or you find yourself under a lot of job stress and look to drugs and alcohol to relieve that stress. Over time, that usage not only changes the shape of your brain, it can even change your genes. First, let's look at how drugs and alcohol can change the shape of your brain. As we discussed, from the scientific perspective, no learning or behavior change can take place unless there is change in the structure of your brain. So how does overindulgence in drugs and alcohol change the shape of your brain? The slide you are looking at is of actual brain tissue. When you overindulge in drugs or alcohol, neurons, receptors, and dendrites, this brain tissue you see here, starts to transform its shape to deal with the onslaught of drugs and alcohol. And when this shape changes, the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you act change. And what is this brain tissue made of? Fats and proteins. It's sticky, gooey stuff, very much like this cheddar cheese right here. And it's not easy to change. Sorry, if you've ever seen me talk before, you know I love to bring my cheese with me. Anyway, this sticky, gooey stuff is not easy to change. It could be said that once enough of this cheese spreads throughout your brain, choice goes out the window. You're now addicted. You will do what you need to do to activate these structures with drugs and alcohol in order to get the hit of neurochemicals like dopamine, serotonin, GABA, and endorphins that make you feel numb and or high. Now, this new overabundance of addiction cheese starts to direct all your thoughts, all your feelings, and behaviors around getting your drug of choice. And this is how you enter the hell of addiction. But with overindulgence, something even more sinister is happening at the level of your genes. It's called epigenetics. Epigenetics simply means that environmental factors are changing the way your genes express themselves. Your genes aren't really changing. What does change is the way they express proteins and enzymes that change the shape of your brain. But the end result is just the same as with people that are born with the variation of the dopamine DRD2 gene that we discussed earlier. In the end, whether you were born with the genetic makeup for addiction or your usage changed the way your genes express, the result is the same. Your biology adapts and forces you to think, feel, and behave like an addict. You become a drug and or alcohol seeker, and it dominates your life, so much so that there's very little room for anything else. What I've just explained right here is why the medical community defines addiction as a disease and why it needs treatment to heal. Just like type 1 diabetes, which is inherited, or type 2 diabetes, which in most cases is caused by lifestyle choices. As you can see, this is complex biological stuff, which is not often well understood by laymen or many addiction professionals. And this complicates our ability to solve our opiate and addiction problems. Therefore, many of us still see addiction as simply a willpower issue. This is because if you're someone who doesn't have the biology of an addict or understand the neurobiology of addiction, you have a very difficult time understanding why an addict can't just stop. We say to them, dude, just knock it off. Get your life together. Just use a little willpower and stop. Suck it up. But here's the trap, and every addict and alcoholic experiences it. They desperately want to stop. They want to use willpower. They beat themselves up because they can't stop, because they can't use willpower. They know they're ruining their lives and the lives of their loved ones. They know they are killing themselves, but they still can't stop using only willpower. Why not? Well, neuroscience gives us the answer to why willpower alone won't allow most addicts to stop. The science shows us that the brain structures of addiction literally steals a person's ability to access the brain structures that allow them to use willpower. How does willpower get stolen? Let me explain. Look at this slide of blood flow in the brain. Why is this picture important? Because once you become addicted, without your drug of choice, an addict or alcoholic goes into what is called withdrawal. And when this happens, the blood flow shifts from the most evolved brain structures, where willpower resides way up here, down to your least evolved brain structures, where impulsive, reactive, acting without thinking resides. In this image of a brain under stress, the red shows increased blood flow to the lower, least evolved brain centers, often called the reptilian brain. This is the part of the brain that, when activated, you become very impulsive, and the results often aren't pretty. Think of your own life. When you're under stress, do you snap at your boss or coworkers, yell at your loved ones, forget important facts, do things that you regret? Of course you do. We all do. This is because of this downshift in blood to your least evolved structures. When under stress, our more evolved prefrontal areas of the brain that have names like the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate, shown here in green, some of the most evolved parts of your brain that house your ability to use willpower, are not receiving enough blood flow to be effectively engaged. The result of these brain centers not being effectively engaged is that all hell breaks loose. So once an addict becomes addicted, their life is chaos. They are either high, seeking more drugs or alcohol, or in withdrawal. None of these states allow healing to take place in their brains or their lives. And for those of us who have addicts we care about, this chaos extends to our lives. So what is the answer to our opiate and addiction problems? First, we need to develop addiction recovery programs that not only understand the latest science, like we're presenting here, but implement it and embed it into their programs, so we purposefully change the brain structures and biology of the addicted so they can be free of their hell. In fact, at the Institute, we are using the learning code science with many organizations that are dealing with the addiction epidemic, like the Parent Engagement Network and Warriors Heart, the first residential treatment center for wounded warriors with post-traumatic stress disorder. Oh, and one more thing before I go. I think it's important to understand why punishment, like prison, is so ineffective in stemming the addiction problem. From a biological perspective, as far as addiction is concerned, it's compassion, not punishment, that will help us solve this problem. In fact, punishment can make things much, much worse. Why? Because punishment is painful. And what has the addict learned? He has learned that he can take the pain away with drugs and alcohol. More importantly, prison is not only painful, it's a dangerous place. And danger and pain keeps the blood flow of those in prison trapped in downshifted states. And as we just learned, trapped in their least evolved structures, and no real healing or transformation can take place when your brain is trapped in these lower reptilian structures. We hope this information better supports you to understand our present addiction epidemic. And know that if there is any way we can support you, all you have to do is reach out. Peace.